Hello everyone, this is Stefano Qasim, a student of History, Culture and Literature course at the Arab American University with Dr. Adil Atawni. So today I'm going to present you an article written by the historian Hobsbawm, Eric Hobsbawm, which has the title of Language, Culture and National Identity. So let's have a look at who's Eric Hobsbawm. So Eric Hobsbawm is a British historian, Marxist and communist. He was born in 1917 and died in 2012. He was a real Marxist, so because of that and because of his political opinion, he faced many difficulties in his life in finding jobs and so on. I would like to say that he served as and for many years as professor of economic and social history at the University of London and as a professor of politics and society at the New School for Social Research. His writings had been translated into more than 50 languages, and his works have made major contributions to the dialogue between anthropologist and historian. And he was a great historian in the 20th century. Who wrote so many books about histories, and he considered to be as the historian who explained the history. And among of his books was Nationalism, The Age of Revolution, The Age of Extremes, The Age of Capital, and The Age of Empire, and other great books. And this article that I'm going to present today was published in 1996 at the Social Research Journal by Johns Hopkins University Press. So, in this article, Hobsbawm showed the historical backgrounds and events that affected the nation-state's meaning, since its definition differs from time to time and from purpose to purpose. He represented the situations of language in cultures, written or spoken languages, which still the main medium of these, and it shows that the main theme of this article is calling for multiculturalism. He argues also that what happens nowadays with culture and language and national identity was not thought of in the heydays of nationalism, and are still not thought of by the dangerous latecomers to nationalism. So he shows us two definitions of nation state according to history, and according to the founders of nation states, the nation state was people living under common law and common situation, irrespective of culture, language, and ethnic composition. And that definition differed at the late 18th century, especially after the French Revolution, and it became a territory preferably coherent and demarcated by frontier lines from its neighbors, within which all citizens without exception come under the exclusive rule of the territorial government and the rules under which it operates. And the inhabitants of this state have been identified with an imagined community bonded together by such things like language, culture, ethnicity, religious, and so on. And he argued that the main unity of the nation state was political, but it became socio-anthropological. He also argued that the new definition of the nation state is what we call nowadays ethnic cleansing, and it is something unrealistic and dangerous. David I. Kertzer, who's an American historian and anthropologist, agreed with Hobsbawm and argued that ethnicity, whatever its basis, is a readily definable way of expressing a real sense of group identity, which links the members of we because it emphasizes their differences from them. And he also argued that nationalism belongs with political theory, ethnicity with sociology or social anthropology. Hobsbawm talked over that the only people who refuse multiculturalism are those whose policies have led or could lead to genocide. He also discussed that the action of multiculturalism and argued that multiculturalism is something normal and existed through history, so we are all multidimensional beings, and national homogeneity leads to multiple identity. And in his article, he quoted a quote from Strangers Have Arisen, talking about Judaism, and it is men who say that the people of Israel should be clothed in secular nationalism a nation like all other nations, that Judaism rests on three things: national feeling, the land, and the language, and that national feeling is the most praiseworthy element in the and the most effective in preserving Judaism, while the observance of the Torah and the commandments is a private matter depending on the inclination of each individual. So, Eli Kiduri argued that Judaism ceases to be the raison d'etre of the Jew and becomes instead a product of Jewish national consciousness, and Hobsbawm also invoked that Zionism has reversal of historic values of itself. In this article also, he mentioned that David Selbor, a London ideologue, calls on the Jew in England to cease to pretend to be English and to recognize that his real identity is a Jew. He responds on this quote saying that human mental identities are not like shoes of which we can all wear one pair at a time. We are all multidimensional beings. Whether a Mr. Battle in London will think of himself primarily as an Indian, a British citizen, a Hindu, a Gujarati speaker, an ex-colonist from Kenya, a member of a specific caste or kin group, or in some other capacity depends on whether he focuses on whether he faces an immigration officer, a Pakistani, a Sikh or Muslim, a Bengali speaker, and so on. There's no single platonic essence of Battle. He's all these and more at the same time. There are three main theses in this article. The first one is that multiculturalism depends on language, and in the state in which we all live, political decisions about how and where languages are used for public purposes are crucial, and the concept of a single, exclusive, and unchanging ethnic or cultural or other identity is a dangerous piece of brainwashing. He argues that multiculturalism and multilingualism could not arise until the combination of three circumstances. The first one is the aspiration to universal literacy, and the second one is the political mobilization of the common people and a particular form of linguistic nationalism. So let's move to the national language. The national language is the language that identifies the nation and unites the people of the nation, and it is the language of political, cultural, and social unit. So Hobsbawm also argued that a single national language only became important when ordinary citizens became an important component of the state, and the written language had to have a relationship to the spoken language only when these citizens were supposed to read and write it. And he also mentioned that so long as most people lived in an oral universe, there was no necessary link between the written language and of the literate minority and the spoken language. And he also repeated this idea of coexistence and multiculturalism, and saying that the coexistence of peoples of different languages and cultures is something normal through history. He also argued that the demand for official federal bilingual education surfaces in 1970s and 1960s and 1970s was a political rather than an educational demand, and it was like part of the rise of a new kind of ethnic and identity politics during this period. So those countries that were paying great amount of money in order to teach their official languages to its citizens who are like living outside of their country, this was part of like the rise of a new kind of ethnic and identity politics. He also said that it would be a problem to have a national language in the areas of mixed settlements such as Spain, because it has 4 national languages there, and each area talk in different language than other, and in the absence of a willingness to change languages, national linguistics homogeneity in multi-ethnic and multilingual areas can be achieved only by mass compulsion, explosion, or genocide. And he also said that it is impossible for the homogeneous countries to stay homogeneous in the present world of mass labor, immigration, mass flight, mass travel, mass urbanization, and so on. And he also said that the universal literacy is extremely difficult to achieve in a written language that has no relation to the spoken vernacular. So the demand for official education in a language other than the already established one, when this doesn't bring obvious advantages to the learners, is a demand for recognition or for power or for status, not for easier learning. And he mentioned that any language that moves from the purely oral to the realm of reading and writing will change its character. It has to be standardized in grammar, spelling, vocabulary, and perhaps pronunciation, and its lexical range has to be extended to cover new words. And he mentioned that if the African American want their kids to be taught in their language, which is the vernacular language, which is not a wrong version of English of standard English, but an independent idiom of its own. This would not be, or this language or this version of language would not be their own anymore, because there would be creation of new lexical items that is like not taught, or they don't know anymore. And he argued that what he said about nationalism may be true or may be not, but it's now out of date because of three things that that happened and were not expected in the past. The first one is that we no longer live entirely in a culture of reading and writing, and this because of like the social and movies and television and so on. The second one is we no longer live in a world where the idea of a single all-purpose national language is generally feasible. That is, we live in a necessary plurilingual world. And the third one is that we live in an era when, at least for the time being, there is a single language for universal global communication, namely a version of English. It means that spoken vernacular languages are no longer only face-to-face, domestic or restricted idioms. And also this means that small languages and dialect can survive more easily, and the minority languages can be cheaply provided for. However, exposure to some bigger language through the media may speed up linguistic assimilation. And it is no longer necessary to make a language official if it is to be like moved out of the home and of the street into the wider world. He also mentioned that in Europe, national standard languages were usually based on a combination of dialects spoken by the main street people, which was transformed into a literary idiom. And the most convenient national languages are either lingua francas or pidgins, developed purely for intercommunication between people who do not speak each other's languages, and this is the definition of lingua franca. And as for the typical third world state, they cannot possibly have just one all-purpose language. And the relation of languages to each other in multicultural, multinational societies is changing. And they also mentioned that a lot of small languages try to set up vernacular universities and make its curriculum in its language, and this is what happened in Syria when teaching medicine was in Arabic, but this create a new problem for those people or for those doctors who want to pursue their studying outside Syria, because no other place in the world teaching medicine in Arabic, and it create a difficulty in learning, and especially for immigrants who were immigrants after the war, and they would never find it easy to pursue their studying. Another important thing to talk about is that the original case for standard language was entirely democratic and not cultural, and for like different purposes such as making the process of communication between people from different culture easier. And the political languages are languages which are created specifically as symbols of nationalist or regionalist aspiration, generally for separatist or secessionist purposes such as Hebrew in Israel. And there is a national tendency to complement political independence by linguistic separation in all over the world. And the last thing to talk about here is there's a new element that encouraged the political creation of language, such as the systematic regionalization of states, which its aim was to assimilate regions without special linguistic, ethnic, or other characteristics to the potentially separatist area. But this raises the specters of general balkanization, and balkanization is the division of like big state to make it it is a division of a big state to make it small states that has its own ethnic and culture. But balkanization will never solve any problems of linguistics and cultural identity, because it will create more and more problems, especially for communication. And balkanization is also a process that would encourage the conflict between people, and we shall continue as before. And what linguistic balkanization will do is to multi the occasions for conflict. Thank you for watching.